fear, of course. Their respect was demanded by brutality, so horrific that in the end, even their friends turned against them. They were mummy's little monsters.
Get ready.
You're gonna marry her? Yes.
Was what it was about. And in 1969, their reign of terror was finally halted by the smallest man in the Met, Nipper Read. Welcome, Nipper. Thanks a lot for coming in. It feels a bit rude to call you Nipper. I feel I should be calling you Mr.
Everyone
Read.
else does.
Did they? All right, well, even the Krays, I gather.
Yeah.
The actual operation to finally get them, after a previous one had failed, because you tried to get them for blackmail, but that had fallen through and they were acquitted, was actually extremely delicate, because you had to get a lot of witnesses together, and the Krays didn't know. They weren't to know.
That's right.
That must have been the trickiest part of the whole operation, keeping it from them.
It was. It started off in a very small way, really. I started off with 2 sergeants and then built it up gradually to 10, and that was the final number that we employed on the investigation until they were arrested.
But you had 200 officers protecting the witnesses.
Later, protecting the witnesses, because that was so important.
Yeah.
And one of the other things that I insisted upon was that we didn't investigate the murders. There were 3 murders that were for investigation, but until they were arrested and locked up and away from damage they could do to witnesses, I insisted that we didn't investigate that, because I was sure that they would learn about that and that witnesses would disappear.
More murders.
More murders.
So how did you get the witnesses to come forward? I mean, how did you manage to convince them that your protection would be adequate?
Well, it was difficult because, don't forget, I'd enjoyed the experience of investigating them previously, so people knew me, and that was important. I think people had got confidence in me.
But a lot of the witnesses were sort of involved in the underworld themselves.
Well,
Those people well acquainted with you.
Yeah.
The thing about the Krays was, I mean, they knew no fear, did they? And they didn't give a snap of fingers for the police. I mean, in fact, one of the first convictions was for assaulting a police officer.
That's right.
So, did you feel personally that at any moment your life might be in danger?
Oh, it was. There's no question about that. I mean, I learned that very graphically when I went to interview a man in prison who said that he was a very wealthy businessman, but nevertheless involved with them in fraud. And he told me quite categorically that he'd been asked to put up £50,000 to get me and one of the main witnesses eliminated. So there was no doubt in my mind about the fact that they had seen me as a target.
Yeah.
One of the things I think about the British public attitude to notorious criminals is that they tend to glamorise them. We all tend to glamorise them and think they're really awfully nice chaps. It's happened to Ronnie Biggs.
Yes.
And it's also happened to the Krays. They're seen as really, despite being brutal, quite charming and friendly. Were they charming and friendly?
They were very charming and friendly to a certain section of the public. You see, I saw a film recently with, or an interview with Barbara Windsor, who said they were really nice chaps. Yeah. Well, they probably were to her. Yeah. She wasn't affected by their violence, by their intimidation, by their terror.
Hitler was quite pleasant to certain people, wasn't he?
That's right. Yeah. But you see, that was only a facade. That was the view they projected to people. And underneath all of that, of course, was this reign of absolute terror which controlled the East End in a vice-like grip.
Now, when you were pursuing them then, and you were being very specific about the charges that you wanted to bring on them, to get them locked away, I'm sorry about that, locked away for good and all, were you doing that because of the threat they posed to people? Obviously, partly it was that. Or did you feel you were on a crusade against evil?
Well, no, it wasn't a crusade, but it was certainly an investigation that had to succeed because of the size of their organisation.
Yeah.
We just got rid of the Richardsons, the other big gang in London, and so it was the time that the Krays had to be really carefully looked at. And so that was one of the reasons, of course, that we built it up fairly slowly. And it went over a long period of time working on the frauds and things of that kind that we took a long time to investigate and research.
We're talking on the programme today, among other things, our phone-in is about people's opinion of the police at the moment in the light of all these scandals about wrongful convictions. When you were in the Met, in your book, you didn't actually accuse anyone of corruption, but you did say that it was rife with petty jealousies, internal rivalries, and you suffered from that.
Well, I did. And of course there was a very strong element of corruption during my service in the Met, because if you remember there was all the what they call the porn squad investigation and things like that, which absolutely horrified me, because if somebody had asked me a week before and mentioned the kind of figures that was supposedly going into money that was going into the pockets of the commanders and the chief superintendents, I wouldn't have believed it.
So it was hidden in that sense. You see, one gets the impression that when a big corruption ring is exposed in a particular force, that other officers, even though they weren't involved in it, as you most certainly would never have been, would possibly have been aware of it, but had simply decided not to follow it up. Are you saying it was well hidden?
It was certainly well hidden. I mean, it was very well organised, you know, with people of that rank involved in it, as it must have been.
Well, you're 16 years out of the force now, so you can't speak with any direct personal experience. What do you think about the reputation of the police today?
Well, I think there's never been a time when the reputation of the police has been at a lower ebb. The confidence of the public have lost all confidence in the police, simply because at a time when a disaster happens, in other words, there's an allegation of corruption or an allegation of a fit-up or a conviction is overturned and so on. The odd time that it happened, the police the public could assimilate that and accept it and say, well, these are just the few. Now there's been this avalanche of a series of problems, and so I'm sure that at the moment the police image is at the lowest ebb, and what they've got to do now is to get back, work hard, and give an honest opinion of themselves back to the public and do the job that they're paid to do as a public servant.
But you agree that there is a problem and it's got to be addressed?
Oh, indeed there's a problem. I mean, that's very obvious. I mean, it's an overgeneralization, because we can't say, well, all the police are corrupt, all the police are... Because there aren't. There are many, many, hundreds and hundreds of good, honest policemen doing a good day's work. But even they would admit that at the moment the confidence of the public must be abysmal.
Just one more question on this, very quickly. What do you think, from your experience and the policemen that you've known in your very long career, what is the motivation, not for taking bribes, we're not talking about that kind of corruption, but for deliberately and knowingly fitting somebody up, as the phrase has it? Why do they do it?
Just to be successful, just to get a conviction, having, I'm sure, satisfied themselves that the people that they're doing this to are guilty of the crime. They assume the position of judge and jury and say, well, this man is guilty, and so therefore the evidence is sparse, I've got to add that little bit more to it,
and we must
which
get
is
on,
disastrous.
But is there a lot of pressure on the police to secure a conviction?
No. I mean, each individual investigator is his own man, and he makes his mind up about whether he can get the evidence or not, and that's what they should do, get the evidence.
So there's no league table or anything?
Oh, no.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much indeed. I feel rude calling you Nipper as well, but since you said we could, I will. Thank you very much indeed.
Good.
And Nipper, of course, was talking about police work in the 50s and 60s, but what about the 90s? We look at the state of